student answers so that they're easier for you to use in teaching and that we can have a better understanding of what your students are coming to the table with. So I'm going to use a second grade Envision lesson. I'll show you guys the teacher guide for this here. You can look right here and it says that Rosa put bricks around her square garden. How many bricks does Rosa need in all? And again, to figure out what skill I'm teaching, I'm looking down here at the set the purpose. In this lesson, you will solve addition and subtraction problems that use geometry and measurement. So it's really getting at the perimeter and getting students to use addition to figure out the perimeter of this shape up here. So as I'm doing this, the first thing I do is go into step 1, put in my question. Rosa wants to put bricks around her garden. How many bricks will she need? I've thought about 3 to 4 ways that my students could answer this problem. I've given 3. This is a pretty easy problem, so 3 problems should be enough. I've said line up and count all the way around. Up here, line up one side so that you're adding 6 plus 6 plus 6. Students might count 2 sides and then add those together as well as like a shortcut for themselves. That's something I think some of my students in 2nd grade would probably do. Now the one part I really want to focus today is on this step 2. I think a lot of you, when I read through your lesson plans, did a pretty good job of thinking through like how are they going to answer this problem. I think when we look at the Envision lesson, it kind of shows us the steps that we want our kids to take to do this math right up here, and it makes this section a little bit easier. What I want to think through more is how we can flesh out step 2 a little bit to really set ourselves up for the best student learning. So the first section that they say is they want you to really think about what are your student, right here, your prep is what are your student anticipated answers. I want to think first about like what are students' answers going to possibly look like. So if I ask these questions over here, like how did you solve the problem? They might tell me things like lined up and counted. These I took exactly from up here. You can see. The other thing is like I could ask the question like what does this part of your picture represent? Or what does this number represent in the story problem? So I know that in my actual problem that this side is 6. So I might ask my students, what does the 6 represent? And I would want them to tell me, I've put in here what their answer would be. I want them to tell me one side of the garden. I might ask them, what do you do next? Because this is a multi-step problem. I know that they don't just need to measure one side, but they need to add all of the sides together to get your total. So if I was asking what to do next, I would want them to count up all the sides or add them all up. I might even add in here, write addition problem for the picture they have. I might want to prompt them to actually write that addition problem. The next thing that was missing out of a lot of your lesson plans, I think that would really help to strengthen them is thinking through what are the possible misunderstandings my students might have on this lesson. So I've gone through a couple and might add a few as we go. The first is that they might measure the garden by the flowers instead of the bricks. So if I look at these problems here, the actual problem that we're measuring tells them how much each side is, but as they're looking at this, I can anticipate, right here I see there's 3 flowers, right? I might anticipate that my learners might actually think that 3 is how wide this is. They might forget that we're measuring in bricks and not flowers. So if they're measuring 3 by 3 by 3 by 3, their perimeter is going to be off. So if they're measuring the garden by flowers instead of bricks, what I'm going to want to do, again, this is the teacher action section of this. I'm going to want to say, actually, let's do this here so I can spell this out a little bit better for you guys. I'll put student misunderstanding, and here we can say bold teacher actions. So if the student's misunderstanding is that they're measuring the garden by flowers instead of bricks, I'm going to prompt them to count the number of bricks they could fit and have them go from there. So I'm going to go back to this problem and I'm going to say, well, how many bricks do you think you could fit here? Remember, or I'm going to say, remember, we're measuring in bricks and not flowers. My students might also add incorrectly. As they're doing this, 12 plus 12, they might actually get the wrong answer because they're just doing the numbers, the addition incorrectly. So there I'm just going to have my students repeat and double check their work. They might also not model with drawings or give an addition fact. So they might figure out, that this is 6 and 6 and 6 and 6 and just count it. I would want to prompt them. See here how they've written it out, 6 plus 6 plus 6 equals 24. I'd want to prompt my learners and ask, how could you write your work down in a number sentence? I'd want to prompt them through that. The other thing my learners might get confused about, that I'm going to type out here, is they might, as we look at this problem right here, they might actually just not know what the steps of this problem are. So they might be able to figure out the side, but they might not need to figure out that they need to go all the way around. So I'm going to write confused about the next step in solving the problem. So depending on where they are, I'm just going to prompt them to repeat to me verbally what they have done and then say, what would you do next? And here I would repeat the question, what would you do next to figure out how far around the garden, to figure out how many bricks go around the garden. So here is yet another potential misunderstanding that my students would have. And again, the teacher actions I would do to fix that. So I'd love to see in your lesson plans coming up that you guys are not just thinking about what are the possible student answers, but how do those align to specific questions. So giving me the questions and then what you anticipate students saying from those questions. The other thing is I'd really like you to start thinking through what are the misunderstandings my students might have about this problem and how can I as their teacher best support them. By thinking through all of this is really in replacement of in the typical lesson plans when we look at key points and translating those in that you've heard other people teaching other things doing. This is that point of saying, what do I want my learners to learn? And how can I make sure that they're getting there? Because by thinking through these things beforehand, you're going to be able to better address them in the moment instead of having to think on your feet. So we can't script for everything. We can't script these lessons out because they could go a million different ways. What we can do is really think through what could possibly happen and what could I do to help make sure that my students are most successful.